My doorbell camera caught something that no one can explain. I never thought a simple doorbell camera could turn my life upside down. It started with a single notification, just one, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. It was a rainy Wednesday night, and I had just finished watching a horror movie. The irony, right? I was settling into bed when my phone buzzed with an alert from my doorbell camera. Motion detected at your front door. I frowned. Who the hell would be outside in this storm? Opening the app, I expected to see a raccoon or a stray cat, maybe even some prankster kid. But what I saw was impossible. There was a person standing at my front door, but something was wrong. Their face was blurred. Not like bad resolution, but deliberately blurred, like someone had smeared Vaseline over reality itself. The figure stood completely still, facing the camera. No movement, no shifting, just staring. Then, after a few seconds, the video glitched. Static crackled, and when the image returned, the figure was gone. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window, peeking through the blinds. Nothing. The porch was empty. No footprints in the rain-soaked ground. No sign that anyone had ever been there. I replayed the footage at least a dozen times, trying to make sense of it. But every time, the figure appeared, blurred and unmoving, before the screen distorted and they vanished. Maybe it was just a glitch. Maybe my camera was malfunctioning. That's what I told myself. But then, another alert. Motion detected at your front door. This time, my hands were shaking as I clicked the notification. The screen loaded. The figure was back. But this time, it was closer. And this time, it knocked. The knock was soft. Too soft for someone standing that close to the camera. But I heard it, clear as day, despite the storm outside. I swallowed hard, my thumb hovering over the app's microphone button. I could speak through the doorbell camera if I wanted to. But what the hell would I say? The figure stood there, still blurred, still impossibly still. Then, another knock. Louder, more insistent. I took a deep breath and tapped the microphone. My voice came out shaky. Who's there? For a moment, silence. The rain drummed against the pavement. The wind howled through the trees. And then, the camera feed glitched again. Not the normal kind of lag either. The screen twisted, pixelated, the colors bleeding into one another like a corrupted file. For a second, I thought I saw something. A flash of a face behind the blur. And then, suddenly, I didn't even see them leave. 1 second, they were there. The next, my porch was empty. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. My brain screamed at me to stay inside, to ignore it. But my body had other plans. Before I even knew what I was doing, I was heading for the front door. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Everything in me said, do not open it. But then I noticed something strange. The doorbell camera was still recording. It shouldn't have been. If there was no motion, it should have stopped. But the light on the app was red, meaning it was still live. Still seeing something. I slowly unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to peek outside. Nothing. Only the sound of rain and the flickering porch light. But then, a whisper. Software just beyond my threshold. Let me in. My stomach dropped. It wasn't coming from in front of me. It was coming from above. I looked up. And that's when I saw it. Hanging upside down from the porch ceiling, its head tilted too far to the side, was the figure. And now, its face was clear. And it was grinning. I froze. The figure was upside down, suspended from the ceiling, its long, dark hair hanging like a tangled mess of shadows. But it wasn't the hair that made my blood run cold. It was the eyes. They were wide open. Too wide. Staring directly at me with a predatory hunger. The face that had once been blurred was now unnervingly clear, the grin stretching impossibly wide, showing far too many teeth. I couldn't look away. In that moment, I felt as if the world had tilted on its axis, and the rules of reality no longer applied. The figure's head didn't move, but its eyes tracked me, slowly, deliberately, as if it knew exactly what I was thinking, what I was feeling. It whispered again, only this time, I heard it clearer. Let me in. The word sent a rush of terror through me. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked in place. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to slam the door and call the police. But my hand wouldn't move. It felt as though I were caught in some invisible web. The figure's grin, it grew. I stepped back, stumbling away from the door. My foot caught on the rug, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting away. But as I moved, the figure began to shift. Slowly, unnaturally slow, its limbs elongated, stretching down towards the ground in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The air around it seemed to distort as it moved, like it was bending the very fabric of reality. And then, it dropped. It didn't land. It just floated. I gasped, stumbling back towards the hallway, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone. The camera feed on the Doorbell app was still live, showing the porch, the distorted figure floating toward my front door like it was being pulled by invisible strings. I had to act. I tapped frantically on the app. I was going to call 911. But just as I was about to hit the number, a new notification flashed on my screen. Motion detected inside your home. My stomach turned. I had a second camera inside aimed at the hallway. I quickly swiped to the live feed. And there it was, the figure, inside. It was standing at the end of the hallway, staring at the camera. Its face was clear now, its grin still stretched wide, its eyes unblinking. But this time, it wasn't outside. It was in my house. A cold, creeping feeling washed over me. It hadn't just been on the porch. It had been there the whole time. Before I could process what I was seeing, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It slithered. The motion was so unnatural, so wrong. Its limbs twisted in directions that defied human anatomy. I couldn't look away. And then it stopped, right in front of the camera, and in a voice that sent an electric shock through my body, it whispered, clear as day. I'm already inside. I'm already inside. The words echoed in my ears, and for a second, everything went silent. The air seemed to freeze, thick with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Maybe. A suffocating, palpable weight pressing down on my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, inches away from the camera. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, its teeth sharp and jagged, like they were designed to tear through bone. My heart thudded in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even think. It was like I was trapped in a waking nightmare. Forcing myself to break the silence, I reached for my phone with trembling hands. I didn't know what to do, but I had to do something. I dialed 911, praying that whoever answered would take me seriously. My fingers shook, but I managed to hit the call button. The phone rang and I heard it connect. A voice on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? I barely registered the words. My voice was strangled, barely above a whisper. Please, you have to help me. Something is in my house. The operator's voice was calm, too calm. Stay on the line. Can you confirm your address? I tried to speak, but my words caught in my throat. I kept staring at the screen. The figure on the live feed was still there. And then, just as I was about to tell the operator my address, the figure moved. It wasn't standing anymore. It was crawling, sliding along the floor, its limbs twisting and contorting, dragging itself toward the camera with horrifying speed. Its back arched unnaturally, the joints snapping in ways they weren't meant to. The grin never left its face. I could hear the bones crackling, twisting with every movement. Sir? The operator asked. Her voice edged with concern, but I couldn't respond. The fear that paralyzed me was overwhelming. In the live feed, the figure's face was now directly in front of the camera, just inches from the lens. I could see the intricate detail of its eyes now. No pupils, just pure black voids. It whispered again, this time low and slow, its voice a rasping, unnatural sound. I've been here all along. And then everything went silent. The feed froze. The screen went black. I slammed my phone down on the table and ran to the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care if it was just a glitch or some sick prank. I had to get out. But when I reached the front door, the hallway was empty. No figure, no distorted figure crawling toward me. Just the quiet of my house. Too quiet. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, and for a split second, I thought it was over. Maybe it had all been my imagination. Maybe it was a glitch in the system. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then my phone buzzed again. I grabbed it, desperate for something that made sense. But when I opened the app, I saw something that shattered my reality. The feed was back on, showing the inside of my house. But it wasn't my hallway anymore. It wasn't the room I'd just been in. It was my living room. And in the corner, standing next to the window, was the figure. It wasn't on the porch. It wasn't outside. It was now standing right there in the middle of my home. And its grin, it was wider than ever. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my breath shallow and panicked. The figure, that thing, was standing in my living room now, its face illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight outside. But there was something worse than its grin, something far more unsettling. It was watching me, through the camera. It was as if it knew exactly where I was, that I was looking at it, and it was waiting. I stumbled back from the door, my back hitting the wall with a soft thud. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. Had I been dreaming? Was I going crazy? But no, my doorbell camera was still live, showing the living room in real time. I turned around and ran toward the front door, knowing I needed to get out. I didn't care anymore. I had to leave, to escape whatever this was before it was too late. But when I grabbed the door handle and tried to twist it, it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, panic flooding my veins. It was locked. I had just unlocked it seconds ago. I was sure of it. I turned back toward the living room. The figure was still standing there. And now, it was closer. I could see its hollow eyes more clearly, the darkness swirling within them. The grin, it never faded. It only grew. And then, from the camera's perspective, I saw the shadow of the figure move. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was walking. Not in the way a normal person would walk. Its movements were jerky, inhuman. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, as though each step was a struggle. It was crawling and shifting across the floor at the same time, a nightmarish dance of movement that defied all logic. I screamed. I slammed my body against the door again, the handle still stuck. I needed to get out. I had to. That's when I heard the sound. A low, echoing knock. From behind me. It wasn't coming from the door this time. It was coming from the living room. I turned around, dread sinking into my chest like ice. The figure had stopped moving. It was standing there, directly in front of the camera now, a few inches away. Its shadow stretched across the floor, unnatural in length. It raised its hand. No, its fingers. They were too long, too spindly. And as it brought its hand up to the camera lens, its grin grew wider, impossibly wider. I couldn't move. The figure reached out, its fingers pressed against the camera lens, right where I was watching from. And then, it whispered one final time, "I'm coming for you." The app froze. The feed cut out. I couldn't see anything. The screen went black. The room around me felt colder. The walls felt closer, like the space was shrinking. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new notification from the app. Motion detected inside your home. And the living room feed was back on. The figure was gone. But now, the entire living room was covered in blood. It was everywhere, all over the walls, the couch, the floor, the windows. And in the middle of it, on the couch, was a body. My body. I couldn't breathe. The blood rushed in my ears, pounding against my skull like a drumbeat. My phone was still in my hand, the screen frozen on that nightmarish scene. My body, my dead body, was lying in the middle of the living room, covered in blood, unmoving. But the worst part? The worst part was the way it was staring. Its eyes were wide open, unblinking, locked onto the camera with the same unnatural intensity that the figure had before. I could feel its gaze, cold and empty, crawling over me. I was paralyzed. My whole body felt like lead. My mind was racing, trying to process the impossible, the unexplainable. Was I dreaming? Was I trapped in some kind of twisted simulation? Or had the figure done this to me? The app buzzed again. A new notification. Motion detected inside your home. But my body, it was already dead. I dropped the phone in a daze, my hands trembling as I backed away from the door. I knew deep down that I was already too late. Whatever was happening, it had already taken me. Then the phone buzzed once more. This time, the app flashed an alarming red message. Live feed interrupted. I spun around, expecting to see the figure again. But it wasn't there. I was alone in the house. At least, I thought I was. I heard a soft noise behind me. A scraping sound. Slowly, I turned my head, dread creeping up my spine. The living room door was now ajar. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. The door creaked as it slowly pushed open by itself, revealing the darkness within. The hallway light flickered once, casting shadows across the walls. Someone, was in there. I could feel it, the weight of its presence pressing on my chest. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I took a hesitant step forward. Suddenly, the lights in the living room went out. The only thing I could see was the faint glow of the streetlights coming through the windows. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The figure. It was standing in the doorway. It was back. But now it was different. Its body was disjointed, twisted at odd angles, and its face was completely inhuman. No longer a grin, but something far more monstrous, with too many eyes, too many teeth. Its skin pulled tight across its skull like it was barely holding itself together. It stared at me, its mouth opening wider and wider, as though it was about to swallow me whole. I stumbled backward, heart racing, my pulse pounding in my throat. And then, I heard it. The whisper. I'm not here to take you. Yet. The figure moved closer, and with every step it seemed to stretch, distort, as if time itself was warping around it. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Before I knew what was happening, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned to find myself standing in front of the darkened mirror in my hallway. I blinked. And I saw it. My reflection. But it wasn't me. It was the figure. And it was smiling. I froze in front of the mirror, my heart racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. The reflection was distorted, twisted. It wasn't me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. The figure in the mirror, the thing that had once been me, was smiling, grinning. Its eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils. Just an endless swirling void of darkness. And its mouth. It stretched wide, unnaturally wide, until it seemed like it would swallow the entire room. I backed away, stumbling, but the figure in the mirror didn't move. It remained locked in place, its grin growing larger and larger. That's when I felt it. A cold, creeping sensation crawling up my spine. It was behind me. I spun around in a panic, but there was nothing. Just the dim hallway stretching into darkness. I was alone. But I wasn't. I turned back to the mirror. The figure in the reflection was still there, smiling at me, its eyes following me like they were alive. "You're not real," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "You're not real." But the figure's grin widened. It knew. Before I could react, the mirror began to vibrate. The glass started to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, distorting the figure's image. It reached its hand forward. No, its clawed fingers, and pressed against the glass. I recoiled, but my hand, as if it had a mind of its own, moved closer to the mirror. And then, snap. The figure's fingers broke through the surface. The glass cracked in all directions, as though the thing on the other side was trying to claw its way through. I gasped and stepped back, my hands covering my mouth in shock, my body trembling. The crack expanded, more fractures appearing on the glass like a spiderweb of breaking reality. The figure's hand pushed through further, its fingers dragging across the cracked surface, leaving trails of darkness in their wake. The smile, it never stopped. It grew. Suddenly, the reflection stopped moving. Everything went still. But I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged breathing coming from the other side of the mirror. I backed up, eyes wide, as my reflection, the thing that was once me, continued to smile, the grin now almost splitting its face in two. And then, through the crack, I saw it. A face. Not just the reflection anymore. No, something was staring back at me through the mirror's fractured glass. A pale, gaunt face. My face. But it was wrong. The skin was drawn tight against the bones, the eyes bulging, the mouth twisted into an expression of horror. It was as if the reflection had become trapped, stuck in an endless scream, silently begging for help that would never come. But the worst part? The worst part was that it looked alive. I staggered back, my breath ragged, but my reflection didn't move. It just stared, silent, watching. And then, without warning, the reflection's hand came through the mirror. I screamed, truly screamed, when I saw its fingers stretch through the crack and wrap around my wrist. It was pulling me in. I tried to jerk away, but the grip tightened and I felt myself being dragged toward the mirror. The world around me began to twist, the hallway distorting, the edges of reality warping. The face behind the glass twisted in that horrific grin. "You've always been mine," it whispered, its voice a low, garbled hiss. I gasped for air, but it felt like the mirror was pulling everything from me. My breath, my body, my soul. And just as I thought I was going to be pulled completely into the reflection, the phone buzzed again. The notification blazed on the screen. "Motion detected outside your home." The sudden sound, the reality-shattering buzz of the notification, snapped me back to reality. I looked down at my phone, almost in a trance, and through blurred eyes, I saw the feed from my doorbell camera. And standing there, at the edge of the porch, was the figure. The real figure. The one I had seen before. And it was staring at me. But this time, its eyes weren't empty voids. They were my eyes. The moment I saw my eyes in the figure on the porch, the ground beneath me felt like it was slipping away. I could hear the pounding of my heart and the faint hum of the phone in my hand as I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. It was me. The figure outside was a perfect reflection of me, but twisted, wrong. Its posture was stiff, unnaturally straight, and the expression on its face was the same one I saw when I looked in the mirror, grinning, hollow-eyed, wide. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. It felt like I was in some kind of sick loop, trapped between the reflection that was pulling me into the mirror and this new, distorted version of myself standing just outside the door. Was it real? I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. A voice inside me screamed to run, to get away from everything, but my body wouldn't move. I felt paralyzed, like the air itself was thickening, turning into something suffocating. The figure on the porch took a slow step forward, its movements jerky, and I saw it again. The grin. That terrible, impossible grin that stretched far too wide. It whispered. though I was sure I was hearing it inside my head, in my bones, in my very soul. "You're not real. You never were." I shook my head, trying to shake off the words, trying to convince myself it wasn't happening. It was just a glitch, just a nightmare, just a twisted reflection. But the figure moved closer. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I reached for the door handle, trying desperately to escape. But as my hand touched it, I realized something. I couldn't feel it. There was no metal, no warmth beneath my fingers. It was all wrong. I looked up again, and the figure was standing directly on the other side of the glass, its hand pressed flat against the door. Its fingers, longer and more twisted than mine, slowly reached out for the handle. Then, something shifted in the air. A deep hum, a strange, buzzing sound that vibrated through the walls. The door started to rattle. And in that moment, the figure grinned even wider. The darkness around it deepened, shadows stretching, growing longer. It was growing, expanding, becoming more than just a figure on the porch. It felt as though the thing outside was reaching inside, like it was infecting everything. My phone buzzed again, startling me. A new notification. I grabbed it, almost too afraid to look, but I had to. I had to know. The camera feed was live, still showing the figure outside. But now there were two of them. One was still standing at the door, its grin impossibly wide, but the other, the second figure, was moving inside the house. The door behind me slowly creaked open. The second figure had already crossed the threshold. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. I could feel the weight of it like a shadow crawling along my skin. The air was thick, suffocating, and I turned slowly, terrified of what I might see. And there it was. The figure stood at the end of the hallway, its head tilted slightly to the side, its eyes now black holes that stared straight into me. It whispered again, this time a breathy, eerie sound. "There's no escaping." I tried to scream, but the sound never left my throat. My body felt heavy, as if the room itself was closing in on me, the walls pressing in, the lights flickering as though they were on the verge of going out entirely. The figure outside stepped forward, its hand reaching for the door. The phone buzzed one final time, and I saw the notification. Live feed interrupted. The screen went blank. The figure in the hallway was closer now. I could feel it breathing, could feel the chill of its presence in the air. The door behind me was slowly creaking shut. I turned toward it, knowing there was no way out, no escape from whatever this was. And that's when I saw it. The reflection in the mirror. It was me. Or rather, it was my reflection, but it wasn't me anymore. It had taken me. The reflection was alive. It was standing where I had been, grinning in that wide, twisted way, the same black eyes staring back at me. And behind it, in the deep shadow of the hallway, I could see something else. More figures, dozens of them, all of them staring at me with the same grin. I was surrounded, trapped between the world I knew and the world where the figures lived. I was beginning to understand. They were me, and now I had become them. I stood frozen in place, my breath shallow, unable to tear my eyes away from the twisted reflection that now grinned at me from the mirror. It was me, but it wasn't. The face staring back at me was deformed, a hideous caricature of my own. The black eyes, the endless grin. It was as if my own face had become the thing I had been running from all along. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what was behind it. The growing mass of figures in the hallway, standing like silent, malevolent shadows, staring at me with that same horrific smile. There were dozens of them, all versions of me, all smiling. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The weight of the moment was too much to bear, like my reality was unraveling, piece by piece. One by one, the figures began to move toward me. The one in the mirror. It reached out. Its fingers, long and inhuman, pressed against the glass, like it was trying to pull itself through. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, a deep, unnatural chill. The reflection of myself in the mirror wasn't just trapped anymore. It was alive. And then, something horrible happened. The reflection stepped out of the mirror. It emerged in a sickening wave of distorted motion, the glass rippling like water. One moment, it was a reflection. The next, it was standing right behind me. It was inside the house. I turned to run, my legs shaking, but the hallway in front of me stretched on forever, like I was trapped in a maze with no way out. The lights flickered, casting strange, jarring shadows that danced across the walls, making everything seem wrong, twisted. I could hear the footsteps behind me. The figure was following me. Each footstep echoed louder, the sound growing heavier with each passing second. I glanced over my shoulder, only to see the second figure, the one from the porch standing at the end of the hallway. Its black eyes were locked on mine, its grin stretching wider, as if it had all the time in the world to enjoy the terror in my face. I turned again, desperate for an exit, but the hallway had completely transformed. It wasn't my house anymore. It was theirs. The walls were closing in, and the familiar warmth of my home was replaced by an eerie coldness that seeped into my skin. I grabbed at the walls for support, trying to steady myself, but they felt wrong. The figures were closing in. And then, the door at the end of the hallway swung open. I hadn't seen it open, hadn't heard it creak, but there it was. An exit. I ran toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures behind me moved faster now, the noise of their footsteps like a tidal wave, deafening. The door beckoned me, but as I approached it, I felt a chill sweep through the room, a strange resistance, like the door didn't want to be opened. I gritted my teeth, throwing my weight into the door. It didn't budge. I screamed in frustration, rattling the handle, trying to force it open, but the door was locked. It was never going to open. I turned back, my eyes wild, searching for another way out. But that's when I saw it. The reflection in the mirror. It had followed me. It was standing behind me, its expression twisted into something demonic, its teeth bared like it was about to consume me. The world around me began to spin. The walls caved in. The shadows grew taller, their forms shifting and warping like they were alive, chasing me, suffocating me. The figures in the hallway reached for me with long, bony hands, their fingers stretching. And then, as if everything was falling apart at once, the air shifted. A sudden, violent burst of static crackled through my mind, like a wave crashing against my consciousness. I gasped for air, clutching my head as the figure's grins grew too wide to be real. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. I pulled it out, my hands shaking, and opened the Doorbell camera app with trembling fingers. The feed was live again, but this time it wasn't my home that was being shown. It was an empty, abandoned house, and standing in the middle of the room was me. I was standing there, staring at the camera, my expression blank. Except there was something different. In the reflection behind me, the figures were there. All of them. And they were smiling. "You've always been here," the figure whispered from behind me, "just like us." And then the screen went black. Everything went silent. The silence was deafening. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, the black screen staring back at me. The house around me seemed to have lost all sound, as if time itself had stopped. The figures were gone. The reflection had disappeared. I was alone in the hallway, trapped in this eerie stillness, and yet something felt wrong. Too wrong. I looked down at my hands, shaking. I touched my face, my fingers brushing over my skin as though confirming that I was still here, still real. But the feeling didn't fade. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling that something wasn't right. Like I had crossed some boundary I couldn't come back from. I glanced at the door again, the one that had refused to open. But now it stood wide, the hallway beyond swallowed by the darkness. I didn't want to look into that void again, but something tugged me toward it, urging me to step forward. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the unknown. As I approached the doorway, I noticed something on the ground. Something I hadn't seen before. It was an object. Small, metallic, and glinting in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat as I knelt down to pick it up. It was a key. I hadn't seen it there before. It hadn't been there when I first tried to open the door. But now it was in my hand, cold and heavy. I stared at it, confused, unsure of what it meant. I reached for the door handle, slipping the key into the lock. It turned effortlessly. The door opened, and I stepped into the darkness. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the world shift again. The air felt thicker, colder. My phone buzzed once more, and I pulled it out in a daze, almost afraid to see what it would show me now. The camera feed was back, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was the same house, the same room, but it was empty. There was no sign of the figures, no sign of anyone. Just an endless, echoing silence. Except for one thing. Standing in the far corner of the room, I could see a mirror, and in the reflection, I saw someone standing in front of it. It was me. I took a step closer, and the figure in the mirror took a step as well. Its grin widened. It didn't blink, didn't move, except for that smile. That same twisted smile. I froze, realizing with a gut-churning certainty that I wasn't alone in this room. The door behind me slammed shut. I turned around, but when I looked back toward the mirror, the reflection was gone. And then the phone buzzed one last time. A new notification. Motion detected outside your home. I stumbled back, eyes wide. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. The doorbell feed came to life, but what I saw made no sense. The porch was empty. There was no one standing there. But then, just at the edge of the frame, a shadow moved. It was faint at first, just a hint of movement. But it was enough. The figure was there again, standing just outside the door, its grin stretching impossibly wide, its eyes locked onto the camera. And as it turned to leave, it stopped. The shadow looked directly at the camera, and then it whispered, "We're always watching." The feed cut to black. The phone went silent. The darkness closed in, and I was left to wonder, was it ever really me?